Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Wild, Wild Death, the show where we talk about all the ways people joined that square dance in the sky in the Old West. Each week, we spin the wagon wheel of untimely demise, and whatever manner of death it lands on, we tell you a story about it. I'm Susan Busa-Leshner.
I'm Leslie Sadali.
And I'm Jack James Busa. The last square dance in the sky, huh? You never know when it's gonna be your last.
Choose your partner when you get up there.
Do.
I want to hear a story. So, Leslie, why don't we get started? And would you please spin the wagon wheel of untimely demise?
Here we go. Spinning. Where is it going to stop? It looks like death by professional execution.
Well, you know what's so weird? I have a story about that.
Way, no kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's hear it.
When a baby enters the world, it's natural for mom and dad to have dreams about their little one's future. Perhaps the baby will one day join the family business. Maybe they'll become president. But it's not possible to accurately predict what a child will grow up to be. For instance, when little George Maledon was born in Germany on June 10, 1830, it's safe to say that no one in his family thought George would wind up being the most prolific executioner in the United States in the late 19th century. This story is called The Hangman.
You're right. I would never have thought, maybe this will be the thing that they'll grow up to be, little baby.
An accomplished hangman.
One can be hopeful. When George was still a child, Maledon's parents immigrated from Germany to the U.S. and wound up in Michigan. George grew up in the bustling and crowded immigrant neighborhoods of Detroit, but he was drawn to the wide open spaces of the West. Lured by job opportunities in the Indian Territory, George headed to Fort Smith, Arkansas, where he found work at a lumber mill operated by the Choctaw Nation. In the 1850s, George joined Fort Smith's City Horse Police. When the Civil War broke out, Maledon enlisted in the Union Army, serving with the 1st Arkansas Light Artillery Battery. When the war was over, Maledon returned to Fort Smith and started working in law enforcement again. By 1871, he was working as a guard for the Federal Court of the Western District of Arkansas. He also served for a time as a deputy sheriff, but by 1873, he was back working for the U.S. Marshals as a jail guard. At that time, the judge who was in charge of the court in the Western District of Arkansas had gotten in hot water for corruption. Oops. So, in 1875, President Ulysses S. Grant appointed a new federal district judge to oversee the court. His name was Judge Isaac Parker. The region swarmed with outlaws, bushwhackers, whiskey peddlers, and murderers. But when Judge Isaac Parker arrived, a new era of hard-line justice began.
I think it's interesting that whiskey peddlers is on the same level as a murderer.
I'm more concerned about the bushwhackers. Because that could really just be anything. What the hell is a bushwhacker? All right, so new judge Isaac Parker, he lands in Fort Smith on May 4th, 1875, and held court for the first time on May 10th. 8 men were found guilty of murder within Judge Parker's first term. And then 6 men were executed by hanging on September 3rd.
Wow.
Hanging 6 men at once was a very big deal. and was covered by major newspapers. On the day of the hanging, about 5,000 people showed up to watch. And from that day forward, Judge Parker became known as the Hanging Judge, who eventually sentenced over 160 men to death.
My gosh.
But it was George Maledon who would see those sentences through. Maledon's primary job was as a guard, but he became the designated hangman due to his experience, dependability, and calm demeanor. He performed the hangings as part of his duties. He constructed gallows, prepared ropes, measured drops, and oversaw the process with methodical care.
His parents are so proud.
So
Well,
proud.
At least he has some dignity in what he does, and
Yes?
I mean, 160 men, yeah, I think that's excessive. I think the fame got to Isaac Parker's head. He became known as this guy, and he thought, well, I have to give the people what they want. No
I
one
don't
went,
think
listen,
so.
you can be whoever you want to be, Isaac Parker. You don't have to be this thing they've created for the public. But fame's a hell of a drug. Anyway, back to George Maledon. George was a small man, about 5.5 feet tall, with wispy hair and a long beard. He dressed in black, quickly gaining a reputation for his efficiency, professionalism, and unemotional bearing, which made him the court's go-to man for carrying out death sentences. Makes sense. So, I know what you're all thinking right now. How does a professional level hanging work?
Leslie, are you wondering that? I'm wondering that.
I was wondering that.
How?
Well, let's begin with the gallows. The gallows used by George Maledon could hang up to 6 men at a time. The gallows stood 12 feet high and had a 20-foot square wooden platform. A staircase led up to the platform where the condemned would be brought. Above the platform was a crossbeam from which one or more nooses were suspended. Beneath the platform was a trapdoor, hinged and designed to swing open quickly and cleanly. Multiple trapdoors and ropes could be rigged simultaneously, particularly during high-profile executions like those on September 3rd, 1875, when those 6 men hanged. There were a number of steps to follow for hangings to go smoothly. To find out what happens when a public hanging was not carried out by a seasoned professional, please listen to the episode from Season 1 of The Wild Wild Death titled Blackjack Ketchum, the Bandit Who Lost His Head. Ding!
Yeah, check that out. That's a very, very different experience.
Luckily for the condemned about to swing in Fort Smith, Arkansas, George Maledon was a pro. He approached hanging as a precise, clinical duty and believed in swift, humane executions which avoided unnecessary suffering, which is
Well, that's good.
nice. This was his process. The first thing Maledon would do is select and prepare a manila hemp rope for each prisoner. He would measure and weigh each prisoner and then adjust the length and coil tightness of the rope based on those measurements.
Wow.
This ensured the neck would break instantly from the fall. Then, there was the correct knot placement. The hangman's knot, which is a multi-coil noose, was carefully placed just behind the left ear to cause a rapid cervical fracture when the body dropped.
Gosh.
Maledon also sometimes tested the drop with weights to confirm the right rope tension and fall distance. On the day of the hanging, the prisoner was led to the platform and placed over the trapdoor. Their arms and legs were bound, and a black hood was typically placed over the head. During this process, Maledon would say little. He was known for being calm and methodical, not theatrical. When everything was ready, Maledon pulled a lever that triggered the trap door. The platform swung open, and the condemned fell through with the rope snapping taut. If everything had been calculated correctly, the sudden stop would dislocate or fracture the neck, causing immediate unconsciousness and rapid death. Then a doctor would check a pulse, and the body of the prisoner was left hanging for 15 to 30 minutes to ensure that he was actually dead before being cut down. Maledon's professionalism earned him a reputation as the most efficient hangman in the Western District.
So let me just jump in here for a second. This is kind of horrifying when you really hear it all down step by step, I think. But, you have to give that guy some appreciation for the fact that he was trying to reduce the amount of suffering as much as possible. Hanging there while your neck is kind of, broken and swinging and, twisting in the wind is just torture. So at least if you're going to do it
well.
Well, yeah, so that's a minimum amount of suffering.
And then he also was so stern while doing it. That's why they liked him. He was so unemotional, untheatrical. He went, "This is my job."
Well, that Black Jack Ketchum episode we have, and they're selling dolls and they're taking all kinds of gruesome pictures. That's a whole different party than this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And who knew there was all the science behind it? The correct weight, the placement of the knot.
Yeah. Somebody went to some trouble to figure all that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they measured Black Jack Ketchum, if we remember, but he decided to gain a bunch of weight between his...
They didn't know what they were doing.
Listen to that episode.
They needed old George.
So how many people did George actually wind up executing?
They say he executed roughly 100 people, but it was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of between 50 and 80. Which is a lot of people.
That's still a lot.
A lot of people.
Lot.
So while George was respected for his job, he, to the surprise of no one, wasn't the most popular man around town.
I was just thinking, I bet he didn't get a lot of dinner invitations.
People probably were a little leery about inviting a hangman to dinner. But George did get married, and he did have a daughter named Anne. He was a family man with a stable job, and sending many men to eternity didn't affect his conscience or cause him to be worried he would be haunted by spirits. That's good. But this is because Maledon wasn't bothered at all. When asked about it, he said, "No, I have never hanged a man who came back to have the job done over." To him, the gallows was simply the final step in justice's march, and he never questioned whether the condemned deserved it. Yeah, it's a good mindset to have when you're hanging 80 people. However, in 1895, Maledon faced a tragedy that shifted his views on law and order. His daughter Anna, known as Anne, had fallen for a man named Frank Carver. The 18-year-old followed Carver to Muskogee, Oklahoma, where she learned that he was already married.
That dastardly dog.
Yes, seriously.
Oh my God.
Wow.
How could you do this to me?
Because you're 18, that's how I can do this to you.
Well, on March 25th, 1895, in a drunken rage, Carver shot Anna in the back during an argument. The bullet severed her spine. Her father rushed her home to Fort Smith, where she lingered in agony for nearly 2 months before dying on May 17th.
Oh my God.
Ah, that is not where I thought this was going.
No, terrible.
When Judge Parker sentenced Carver to hang, Maledon must have felt some sort of satisfaction that justice was done. But after an appeal, Carver's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Maledon, a man who never flinched at carrying out executions, found the court's mercy intolerable.
As you would, my baby got killed.
Well, what's interesting about this is, like as we said earlier, this is someone who is just doing what the court says. And this is the first time his emotions come into play.
Yeah.
This time, it's personal. So, he resigns from his post and he leaves Fort Smith behind. See you later. In retirement, Maledon toured the country with the macabre exhibit. Photos of outlaws he'd hanged, sections of rope, even pieces of the gallows. He called it the Executioner's Museum. And he told stories with the same matter-of-fact tone he'd used when dealing with the condemned. For many, the exhibit was both a curiosity and a reminder that justice in the Indian Territory had come at the end of a rope.
Whoa. I'm sorry. Here's what's occurring to me. Some guy that's like, I'm just doing my job, keeps souvenirs.
Yes.
On any job, you get little things, little this and that from the work. Some people collect staplers, others collect fragments of
pieces of rope.
Yeah, sure. By 1905, Maledon's health had declined and he entered the Soldiers' Home in Humboldt, Tennessee. He died there on May 6, 1911, and was buried in Johnson City Cemetery, far from the gallows, the courtroom, and the land he once policed. Though he's often reduced to the morbid title of the Prince of Hangmen, George Maledon was more than just an executioner. He was the living embodiment of law in a lawless land. He did not relish death, but neither did he shy away from it. His work was grim, but he was methodical and resolute in carrying out his duties. But it was the horror of his daughter's death and the failure of the justice system to deliver what he believed was a fair punishment that finally created a crack in Maledon's otherwise ironclad stoicism. In the end, it wasn't the hangman's rope that broke him. It was mercy.
If you'd like to know more about this episode, check out the links in our show notes. You can also find us on social media at The Wild Wild Death, or visit our website at thewildwilddeath.com.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
Adios, muchachos.
The Wild Wild Death is a 2222 media production.